Our next speaker is an organizer, another young person, he's younger than me anyhow, top organizer. He wrote the initiative that was going to be on the ballot until they pulled it at the last minute and made SB 54. A member of the CRA Board of Directors. He's from Californians Against Waste, and he's probably the #1 advocate for zero waste, right? Nick?
Yeah.
Nick Lapis.
If you're not for zero waste, what are you for? Good morning. I tried to bring my toter, but Southwest wouldn't let me check in and didn't fit in the overhead, so I just left it at the airport. Sorry. A word about CAW for anybody who's not aware of us. We're an environmental organization based in Sacramento. Been around for 45-ish years. I always lose track of the number, but work on waste reduction recycling policy in the state capitol and at the regulatory agencies. So I made way too many slides, as Doug reminded me as I sat down, because we're supposed to talk for 10 minutes, and I put 18 slides, and I usually talk about a minute per slide. So I'm going to go faster than I intended to, but I think you all have access to the slides afterwards. I wanted to start off with a recap of what happened last year in the legislature. Last year, we were coming off a huge year where we had more big bills passed than we had ever had in the history of the state in terms of waste reduction policy. Last year was a little slower, but still a really big year. So two of the biggest victories we had, the first was right to repair. SB 244 by Senator Eggman is the California Right to Repair Act. It's something we've been working on for 5 years, and a lot of folks have been working on it for a lot longer than that. It was nice to finally get that over the hump, so to speak. Major shout outs to folks like Laura Anthony and others who've been doing a lot of advocacy around right to repair at the local level. The gist of the bill is actually pretty simple. All manufacturers of appliances and consumer electronics have to provide all of their parts, diagnostic information, and tools to third-party repair and to individuals. So the classic example would be, Apple didn't want anybody opening their iPhone, so they created their own screw so nobody could open the iPhone, right? And so now they have to provide that screwdriver to any member of the public starting in July. The other bill that kind of the perennial issue that never goes away for CAW was the beverage container program and expanding the bottle bill. So the year before, the legislature expanded the bottle bill to cover wine and spirits. Last year, it expanded to cover large juice, which is one of the few remaining loopholes left in the bottle bill. And that was another multi-year effort. We were excited to get over the finish line. This is a very outdated version of the slide from a different presentation I gave. Okay, I'm sorry. So there are a bunch of other bills signed as well. I won't go into them. I did originally have a little thing highlighting one of the other bills that got signed, which was the Climate Corporate Accountability Act, which requires larger corporations to report their climate emissions. And you might be thinking, so what? What does that have to do with us? But the cool thing about it is that it includes what's known as Scope 3 emissions. So that includes all your upstream emissions from your purchases and all the emissions from your disposal of the things you generate. And that's groundbreaking. So the large companies are suing to try to stop it, but assuming it gets implemented, all companies that have over $1 billion in revenue will have to report the impacts of the solid waste they generate and the upstream impacts of the materials they buy. There were also, again, this is unfortunately an older version of this presentation. I'm actually wondering if the slides I meant to include in the end are on here. We'll see. The governor also vetoed a lot of bills in the solid waste space. I won't go into them because I don't have enough time. There were some notable vetoes that we were kind of surprised and unhappy about. One being the ban on plastic gift cards. So there was a bill that got through the legislature without a ton of attention, requiring all gift cards to be cardboard or paper. Why that got vetoed, I couldn't tell you for the life of me. There was also a bill requiring microfiber filters in washing machines, something we've been working on for a long time, that again, kind of quietly went through the legislature without a huge amount of attention, but was vetoed for some reason. Okay, so here's the unfinished business from last year. One bill that's left over from last year is AB 660, which would reform expiration date labeling to basically simplify the terminology used for expiration dates, make it uniform across manufacturers, and get rid of consumer visible sell-by dates. The reason this is a big deal is that there have been multiple studies that have shown that it's the single most cost-effective thing we can do to reduce food waste. Everybody, almost everybody, throws away food on the date on the package, right? You check the date and you throw it away. Well, most times that date is just supposed to be meant for the store to know when they're rotating their stock. It has nothing to do with the safety or the quality or anything else about the product. And so and even if it's not a sell-by date, the terminology that brands use is all over the place. And so one company says use by, and they mean it's going to be bad after this date. We can't guarantee it's going to be safe for you to consume. Another company says use by, and they mean, well, it's going to be peak freshness. Our cereal is going to be at peak freshness until this date. And then it might slowly get staler over time after that. And so what we're proposing is to have uniform terminology. So you have one term for safety, one term for quality, and no consumer visible sell-by dates. The thing that I had added to the slide is that we introduced a companion bill that basically, I won't get into details, but basically is in a different part of the code section. The reason is this bill wasn't able to get out of the Senate Agriculture Committee, so we introduced an alternative vehicle that would not go to that committee. It doesn't matter, the concept is basically the same, but just a different code section. So this was a bill we did last year, AB 1290, which would have banned a series of plastic materials from the US Plastics Pact list of unnecessary and problematic plastics. So things like PVC, PFAS, PETG, et cetera. We weren't able to get this bill passed, so we've introduced a scaled-back version focusing on the two most toxic forms of plastic packaging, PVC and PFAS. And so the new bill, which I'm going to try to remember the bill number, AB 2761, or some combination of those numbers, would be a ban on all PVC packaging and a ban on the inclusion of PFAS in plastic packaging. And that's a big deal. It's important for us to start thinking about the circular economy as a circular economy that doesn't circulate toxics. So you think of something like PFAS. Does it affect recyclability? Not directly, but can we have a circular economy if we're circulating PFAS through the system and poisoning people? No. So let me flag a few other issues. And when I made this slide, this was back in October, there weren't actually bills. Now there actually are bills. It's still, yeah, it's a little bit more confusing. But the three other issues we have on deck that I think are really important are, one, fixing the loophole in the plastic bag law that allows the thicker bags. Senator Blake Spear is one of the authors of that bill. You know, it's about time. I think everybody knows that that was never intended to be about switching single-use thin bags for single-use thick bags. That's not what people voted for. It's not what the legislature voted for. It's time to close that loophole. The one on the right is a reference to dine-in. And so Senator Blake Spear also introduced legislation requiring all chain stores or chain restaurants to offer beverages on reusable mugs and glasses. And we've tried to put our toe in the water towards dine-in and reuse a few times in the past. Haven't gotten that far. We think this is a very logical first step for the legislature, especially since Starbucks has already announced that they're planning to do this voluntarily. Let's make the other manufacturers or the other restaurant companies come out and say that they can't do what their competitor is saying they're going to do voluntarily. Again, this is going to face pretty strict opposition. I imagine folks like McDonald's and the other chains are going to be pretty up in arms about it. But we think it's important to change the conversation from what type of disposable packaging we're using to how do we reuse more? How do we go back to dining in on actual mugs? And then lastly, I think there will be a lot of conversation about SB 1383 and implementation of the state organics law. There's somewhere around a dozen bills that were introduced in the past 2 weeks on organics policy. There was a report that came out a year ago from the Little Hoover Commission that said, we need to pause implementation of SB 1383 because we haven't hit our targets and we're not on track. It was really unfortunate that the Little Hoover Commission decided to look at this issue in literally the first few months of implementing the program. I think we all know these programs aren't easy, and even without COVID, I'm not sure we would have had 100% implementation when that report came out. Add in COVID on top of that, and it's no surprise that they said, well, most jurisdictions aren't implementing it yet. That said, I don't think there's any appetite for pausing SB 1383. And I think you can see that in the bills that are introduced in the last 2 weeks. All but a couple oddball bills are about specific tweaks to help jurisdictions comply. How do we add more procurement options, like community compost? How do we make some tweaks for rural jurisdictions just for purposes of fairness? How do we increase technical assistance to local governments? Those are the types of bills that were introduced. It's really comforting to me to see that no one has proposed that we do away with the program. Everyone has shown up and basically said, let's work together, provide more tools to local jurisdictions.